Well, welcome everybody. I'm Alecia Orsini, and I'm the president of Women in Film and Television of New England, and I'm really excited to have these wonderful women here. So welcome to our panel. Give yourself a round of applause. So we're going to talk about some survival strategies, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Women in Film is. So first of all, do we have any Women in Film members in the audience? Yay. Wonderful! Yay! Thank you for being here. So Women in Film has been around for about 36 years here in New England, and we are focused on helping women tell their stories and see their vision through their mediums, whether it's television, film, or another medium. And there are a few guys in here that are members. Hey, yes.
Fantastic, yeah.
We do accept male members because, you know, it can't make change in a silo, and everybody's going to work together to make the industry better. So, yeah, we can cheer for that. That's totally great. So if you want to learn more about us, you can find me throughout the festival. You can also go online to womeninfilmvideo.org, or our shorthand, which is WIFVNE.org. So, now, we have these wonderful women on the far end here. We have Erika Frankel, who's a producer, writer, director, and a very accomplished documentarian whose work you can see on PBS. And you have two films here. You have
King George.
King George.
Yes. And, oh, and Annie.
And Annie.
Yes,
and I was like, don't.
It's a great honor, yes.
And Annie, so welcome, Erika. And then we have Karen Allen, who has a film here, A Rock, a Tree, a Cloud.
A tree, a rock, a cloud.
A tree, a rock, a cloud.
That's really
Got it backwards. You may know some of her work from Animal House, Sandlot. There was this one with this guy, Indiana Jones. And then recently, Year by the Sea. You were here for Year by the Sea. So welcome and thank you for being here. And then we have Catherine Eaton, director, writer, actor, producer, very good at Shakespeare, who has a film, The Sounding, here. And she's a member of the female directive collective Femme Fatales, also New York Women in Film, SAG-AFTRA, and AEA. So welcome. And Elika. Elika Portnoy, whose film here is The Sixth Amendment. Actress, writer, director, is known for her work on Immigration Tango, Tricks of Love, and Beast of No Nations. Welcome to you. So I want to get started with just a little overview of how you came to the film industry. So we'll talk to you starting on the end.
I started as an anthropologist. I studied in college anthropology, and I always think of what I do today as a documentary filmmaker as kind of an extension of that, because in school I had a notebook and was observing the world, and these days I do that with a camera and try to share what I find with the world. So right out of school, I started working at American Masters, which is a series at PBS that profiles artists, writers, musicians. And really from there, I was a production assistant, then an associate producer. I was there for 3 years, and really every job I've ever gotten since then, and even probably in an indirect way meeting my husband, who's also a filmmaker, came from that, because every project I worked on was its own mix of a different director, producer, editor, everything. So it was a really great place to start, which I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it was a good thing. And since then, I've gone on to work on all different kinds of documentaries, a lot of arts and culture, but also a lot of history and science. And then I made my directorial debut with King George, which is about food and culture. So,
wonderful.
Thank you.
Karen?
So I started working in the theater when I was 22 years old in Washington, D.C. I became very, very immersed in that world in working. I started in experimental theater, which was very, very much vibrating in that time period. And film always seemed like, a distant world that I knew nothing about. But when I moved to New York, maybe 4 years later, after working with a theater company for a number of years, I was just, an out-of-work actor in New York looking for a job, and I happened on a little 3x5 card that said feature film, casting college-age actors and actresses, send picture and resume, and I popped a resume in, really not giving it a second thought, and it turned out to be Animal House, which was casting. And really not, feeling much about doing a film one way or another because I didn't know anything about that world. I showed up for a meeting and they ended up asking me to do the film. So that was sort of my entry into the world of filmmaking, which was very seat of the pants. I knew absolutely nothing about it, what I was doing, but fortunately for me, it turned out to be true for almost all of the actors in the film. They were all theater actors who for the most part were making their first film, so we were all in the same boat. And it was a wonderful way to begin, embark on working on films. And that film was so successful when it came out that it really opened the doors to all of us as actors. So suddenly, what can be a very challenging thing, which is to show up with, some experimental theater credits on your resume, trying to get into the door of a casting office or to meet, on a film project or even on a theater project for that matter. It suddenly, became a much more accessible world based on having been in that film. And then I've been directing in the theater for the last 10 years, and the film that's here, A Tree, a Rocket Cloud, is my first film that I've directed.
My story is exactly the same, only they didn't cast me. So I sent in my headshot and heard nothing, and here I did start in theater also. I was just a very good student, and so the teachers all gave me parts because I would actually learn them and do them. And then I thought, maybe I can make a living doing this. And so I trained as an actor. I was classically trained in London and also in the United States, and I went and did classical theater kind of around the world. And I was doing other acting as well, some TV. I've been on Law and Order and all those. But I had no intention of directing or moving into film aside from doing the occasional part in films that I could get or in television that I could get. I enjoyed it, but I didn't have any kind of aspirations towards it. And then I wrote this one-woman show for myself about this woman who takes on this acquired language woven out of Shakespeare's words, and I took it all over the place. We did it at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center and around Europe, and sometimes we played at houses of 200, and sometimes we played at like 3 people and a dog, and because we were performing in a church. I'm not proud of this, but we recruited those people from the graveyard next door where they were paying their respects. So anyway, you get your audience where you can. But so we took it all over the place, and I was doing it in this, that's total true story, and I was doing it in this glassed-in storefront space in the Roger Smith Hotel in Manhattan, which is on 47th and Lexington, because my friend was the artistic director there, and they had an artistic director, which is very visionary of them. And so I was performing it there, and you perform inside the space, and here was this woman in this hyper white, brightly lit observation room of a psychiatric hospital in this storefront, so to speak, in a gown scrawled in Shakespeare, and the sound's piped out onto the street to all the people that walk by. They say 10,000 people walk by every 4 hours. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. So I was performing it, and it became this kind of cult hit where the sidewalks got packed and the police had to come because people wouldn't move on and the cars wouldn't move through the intersection, and pizza delivery guys would come and watch the whole thing and their pizzas would get cold, and stockbrokers would just talk on the phone the whole time. Like, they didn't listen, but they watched, and moms with kids and homeless people would bang on the glass saying, "I'll get you out." That's true. And every night this man came in, he was always in a tuxedo. And I thought he was a caterer because I didn't know anybody else who would wear a tuxedo every single day. But he had a peach-colored newspaper under his arm, the Financial Times. So the guys in the back jokingly called him the financier. And they said, "Oh, did the financier come tonight?" And the last night of the play, he waited for me afterwards and said, "I would like to turn your play into a feature film." He was wearing a tuxedo because he was a fancy person. And he became the seed money and the first investor and launched me, changed my life. It completely changed my life. So I wouldn't be sitting here if that hadn't happened, and now I wouldn't look back.
Wow.
also your first time?
Yeah, it's my first, thank you. This is my first feature. It's my first time directing. It's called The Sounding. It played last night, but we'll tell you, I'm sure, how to find it.
So everybody has their first. I'm also first time.
Yeah, oh, great.
My background is in finance, so I had a pretty successful career in finance, and then I thought I should explore arts. So I studied for 2 semesters at Berklee School of Music. Said I didn't quite wanted to do that. Then I did dance at the Boston Conservatory for a semester. And then I studied acting at Harvard. It was the Harvard Extension School, and met a lot of people and got into 2 feature movies and 1 short, and that sort of exposed me to filmmaking. And almost from the very first movie, I kind of wanted to do also to be on the other side of the camera, and I think I started producing pretty much after the first movie I started acting in. So I started this in 2008. So it's been 9 years, and I've done 8-9 movies since. Acting or producing or writing, and first time directing is tonight at 6 p.m. So.
So you all know what you're doing at 6 p.m. tonight. Well, something that you brought up, which I'm so glad you did, was financing. So we asked members of Women in Film some questions that they wanted to ask. And I think the most we got was, how did they find their funding? So we talk a little bit about where you're you're a financier. You knew all the tricks, right? No.
Well, I actually think that there is so much money in the industry that you actually, if you have a good product and you have to compete. You compete, but if you have something good, money are going to compete for you. There is too much money in too little product. So nice. I think, well, the challenge with women directors.
I sense some disagreements in the room.
I just would like to know the people she knows. That's wonderful. That's a wonderful, take that away and go with that, because that's a great perspective to have on the industry. People are always looking for content, but it's hard to get to rise above the noise to be heard by the right people sometimes, so it can be difficult to be financed. Our film was all private equity all the way through to the very end of post, and then at the very end of post I ran out of money and we did a crowdfunding campaign that was wonderfully, blissfully successful, and it was strange because it happened right after the election. It was a really tough time when the country was very divided, and I felt uncomfortable doing it at that moment. But there's something about the film spoke to people in that moment specifically, and so I was very fortunate. I do recommend crowdfunding, even if you don't need it, doing it on some level, because it really does create a tribe of incredibly loyal people that if you're careful with them and you communicate with them, they really support you and have your back. They've showed up at festivals, they email me asking about the film. I feel like the community of the film extended beyond my cast and my crew, who are amazing and are an incredible part of this process for me. I feel like the tribe tripled when we did the crowdfunding, so it's really worthwhile. But we did start all of it with private equity, starting with this man, which helped a lot because your first money in is very difficult to get. Having the first person put money behind a film and say yes to it, especially if it's someone who others might want to emulate, a successful business person, a well-known production company. When someone like that says yes to you, it becomes easier to get other people to say yes to you. That first yes can be hard. The only advice I have, because I did it through that strange way, is so if you don't want to perform a one-woman show on the corner of New York City, the advice that I would have is just be incredibly, it sounds lame, but aside from being prepared and doing your work and having your understanding about a budget, doing that research and getting a line producer on to draw those numbers up for you, to be smart and informed so you can talk about money with people, even as a director, even when you're not a producer. The thing I would advise is just be really, really passionate about your project, and not false passion. if you genuinely care about your project and really believe that it's a story that needs to be told, even if it's a comedy and completely entertaining, there's a need for those things. That communicates, and somebody will also agree with you, and they will end up writing that check. Because stories do matter. They are really significant, and I can tell a whole other story about that. But that's what I would say is really believe in your project and with everyone you communicate with, because you don't know where that money will end up coming from. I had no idea it would come from a play. You know, it can come from it could come from this room. Somebody could know somebody could know somebody. So just make sure that whatever project you choose to be the first project you need to finance, that you really believe in it.
Well, I have quite a different story than these. I would say it was the real challenge of making this film. And part of it has to do with this is a short film. So we're not looking for investments. There's going to be no return. It was being made as a not-for-profit film. So we were really looking for contributions. We were looking to raise the money. And I had two producers who were first-time producers. And while I love them dearly, and we were a great team, and we stuck together over the last 3 years to raise the money to do this film together, we were all three. I mean, this was my first time directing and producing a film, their first time producing a film, and we really struggled to try to raise the money. And we made some of the classic mistakes that people make. I mean, they say, don't start shooting until you have your money for post. Well, we got so sidelined trying to raise the money to shoot that we did have a number, and we said, if we can raise this amount, we're just going to go ahead and start shooting and hope that we can raise the money for post after or while we're shooting. And it's never a great idea, but sometimes you have to do it, because I had the wonderful actor Jeffrey DeMunn and the wonderful actor James McMenamin, who had both fortunately little holes in their schedule where they could do this. I had a cinematographer who works all the time and a production designer who works all the time, who had little holes in their schedule. So once we set a date, we had to really be committed to go forward, and we were just scrambling to have. You know, even though it's a short film and even though it was not for profit, I wanted to pay everyone. You know, I've had some great conversations with short filmmakers who did films here for almost nothing. I don't know why nobody came up with that idea for us, but we didn't. We paid our cinematographer, we paid our sound, our sound guy, and we paid our production designer. So, we ended up with, a short film budget, but it was a budget where we really needed to raise the money. And fortunately, my film is based on a Carson McCullers story. And this is just a little blessing coincidence that happened is as we got close, knowing we were going to shoot this spring, it turned out just serendipitously that it was Carson McCullers' 100th birthday, which I had not been aware of when we started working on the film. And we got in touch with the Carson McCullers Center, which is in the place of her birth, Columbus, Georgia, told them what we were doing, and they said, oh, we'd love to be a part of this. We'd love to partner with you, and we'd love to help you make this film. And then on your side, we'd love for you to come and be a part of the celebrations that are happening around the world when the film is made, which was them, really sticking their necks out because they had no film, and it was my first time directing. So they really took a chance on me that we were going to have something they would be proud to show at all of these, what have turned out to be some sort of big events in different parts of the world. One of them being her actual 100th birthday in Columbus, Georgia, the place of her birth. So along the way, it's just been so we got through shooting the film. We then had to go into a very stressful trying to raise the money for post-production. And then we've gone on into very stressful times of trying to raise the money for the film festivals, because it really actually never stops. You think at some point, phew, we got through that. And then you realize there's a whole another level of financial commitment and responsibility to see the film through. And often when it goes to film festivals, you really do want to be there with it. It's like your baby in a way. You know, you've worked so hard on it, and you want to be there, and you want to, you know, be a part of kind of shepherding the film out into the world. And that takes another level of financial support on some level. So you know, people say, do I want to do another film? And I'm saying, yes, I do, but I never want to be a part of raising money again, because I don't know who you know, but I wish that we had just felt like we could make some phone calls and find, you know, people who would have just written checks for us. But we found it very, very difficult to get. Maybe it was the time period. You know, I think this has been a rough time for people to want to support the arts in some ways, but anyway, it's been a struggle for us, and it's, I think, fortunately, almost over. But
well, I did the thing you're never supposed to do, which is I started out by putting some of my own money into the principal photography. There are some grants that I'm aware of now that are for if you have something that's happening, you know, it's happening on a certain date and you need to catch it. It's kind of like I think the Fledgling Fund might have one of these grants, but I think that's more if you're like going to a war zone or something, or, you know, something. And I was going to a kitchen to film, so it was not. I also think that it seems to me, you know, talking about the struggle of finding funds to make these pieces of art. It seems like in the documentary world, if you have a story that's about something to do with the environment or something to do with like a social issue, you know, a humanitarian issue, those are much more fundable, I think. And I was making a film about a chef, which was more, you know, it was a film about generations and change and culture. And so in the beginning, I filmed on and off for about 3 years. So it would just be myself and a camera person going from New York to Philadelphia, and it was like a little, you know, I paid all of my crew and everyone I know. I know also a lot of independent filmmakers who are able to make something for nothing almost, and I just feel the need to, you know, to support the people that are giving the time and energy to work on something. So it would just be, you know, a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there. When it comes to editing, that's when you're shelling out lots and lots of money to pay your editors and the final post and everything. So in the end, it was kind of a lot of begging, borrowing, and stealing, and a few individuals and an organization coming forward to contribute to the film. And in the end, I ended up selling the film to IFC Films and Sundance Select. So I got back some of the initial investment that I had invested myself. But I was aware going into it that the odds of, you know, A, selling a documentary and B, making any money off of it it's like getting through the needle in the haystack, the eye of the needle, so.
Can I add, actually, and that is a good point, like when we were, and you should do some research on specifically, or if you haven't, do some research with experts about this, because there are certain things that you are required to say, and you can't approach everyone about investing private equity in a feature. There's a certain way that you need to do it, because it has to be expendable income, because it's a high-risk investment. But one of the things that was really important and valuable for us was that idea of the people. It is incredibly high risk, and it's very unlikely that you'll make your money back. So that goes to that point I was talking about really caring and being incredibly passionate about the story you're telling, because what you need to do is convince that person that story's worth telling at their expense. If they make their money back, fantastic, but their motivation, especially for indie feature of a smaller budget size, their motivation isn't going to be, nor should it be, to make money off of the film. It's great if people think that there's potential for that, and that can happen, and especially in these smaller budget films, it actually really can happen. But what's really important is that they want to tell that story, and that they can, you know, that they have the ability, they have the finances to tell it, and you have the creative ability to tell it, and those two things get that story told. So it's just worth keeping that in mind, that idea, because it is high risk. There have to be other reasons for these people to want to give you their money. And some of it sometimes is about the glamour and fun, and, you know, they can invest in a piece of art on the wall, or they can invest in a movie that's going to screen in front of people, and they get, you know, but anyway, for what it's worth, it's just goes back to that sense of, you know, the story, you need the story to need to be told. And then paying people becomes important because they won't, you know, if you give them points in your film, that may never yield anything, so.
Yeah. Well, there's something I think too about, you know, we are women, talking from that standpoint of our funding, and I find it very interesting what you said, because I feel like there's a mentality behind the funding. Oh, of course, my project is good enough, of course it's going to get funded. And I think that's not always a mentality that we have as women. So I want to address something else then, is that what are the pitfalls as women filmmakers that have you come against? And also I'm going to combine it with how do you decompress from those struggles? Do you want to start, or is that anybody can start?
I kind of want to hear your answer.
Well, that's a different ball game altogether, because I think most of the list I get a lot of, because I produce mostly, so I get a lot of lists with potential directors for different projects, and we look and think of what, because it always takes it takes forces to actually do a movie. It couldn't be just you, it has to be a couple of really passionate people putting all the effort and the energy behind it, and you always want to package the best script with the best director. And very often I get lists from various places of directors, and there is hardly any women on them. And recently, in the last couple of years, there are a couple of companies that actually finance just women in film. I think Game Changer was one of the funds that there's a fund called 51.
Yeah, 51 fund.
And there is another one that's being raised right now. There is a company out of New York, and Hubble is the producer behind and the financier. The company is called Tangerine. They only look at movies directed by women. That's all they do. So there is now in the industry, there's people looking at that, but traditionally, no. So
Right.
there's no, you just look at it at the list and you figure out who is the best person, the most qualified. And unfortunately, most women have not done a movie before. So you don't want to have a first-time filmmaker. You want to have a second-time filmmaker or a third-time, and with the first really good product.
Right.
So from financiers and producers' point of view, you're always looking for, so somebody has to give you a first chance.
Right.
And that's harder.
Right.
That's harder.
Yeah.
Second chance and third chance is easier, but first chance is much harder. How do I decompress? Is that
Yeah, how do you decompress?
how do I decompress? I kite surf.
Kite surfing. Okay. I'm making a list for hobbies I can take on. Really, that's kite surfing.
Surf.
Okay.
Wow.
Is kite surfing the thing where you, and it's on the
kite.
surf? That's so great. Wow.
It's adrenaline.
Adrenaline junkie thing.
Adrenaline junkie, yeah.
It's like getting the further thrill is the thing that lets you relax. It's cool. So, are you asking about what are the pitfalls in terms of
In terms of your experience as a female filmmaker, so
creatively or business-wise?
both.
Oh,
I know.
and specifically around being a woman.
Yeah.
I don't know. Pitfalls is tough. I guess. I might say I don't really remember having this experience specifically, but I guess I would say so. I didn't really experience directing my film because of the way my film was financed and the way that it happened, that it came out of this show that I had written already, like a play. The play is a small part of it, but that it sort of started from that genesis. So there was belief in the project before I decided to become a filmmaker, if that makes sense. Because of that, I didn't really experience the process as being a woman, a female filmmaker, bringing her film out into the world and trying to get it made. I was someone who was fortunate enough to have other people who said you should make this into a movie, and I began that process. So I didn't really experience being a woman, a female filmmaker in the industry as a director until later, I think. But I guess I would say that I think that there's something interesting about maybe in general, this is very much a generalization, but it's something that's come up with other female directors and filmmakers that I know. We won't always be the first one to say, yes, I can do that, give it to me. This is a wide and sweeping generalization, so please don't take this as fact, but I think that and I don't actually want us to, I don't want people who don't do that to necessarily take on, I don't think that the way forward for female filmmakers or any filmmakers that are somewhat marginalized is to co-opt the other filmmakers' status and way of doing things. I think our strength is that what is important and valuable about any filmmaker and any storyteller is whatever makes them incredibly unique, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're LGBTQ, cisgender, whatever it is, person of color, the thing that is the most unique about you is your strongest point as a storyteller. Now, there are certain skills you have to direct and leadership skills and things like that, but there are many different ways to lead. So I think it's really important to hang on to that. However, if what you're pitching to is a group of, let's say, executives who are used to seeing, a young white man sit in front of them and behave in a certain way, and then you come and you have a different language and a different way of doing things, and to them it doesn't read as director or read as leadership, that can be a challenge. It can be challenging to convince them that you deserve your second picture or your first picture, that you deserve your $20 million budget, even though the film that you made was a micro-budget film. I think that's where there are some challenges, but I don't know that I would advise anybody to try to emulate somebody else's leadership skills and somebody else's creative skills, because I think you really will lose the very thing that's going to be the thing that I hope will be what excels all of us and propels all of us forward as storytellers, because we need diversity in our storytelling. We must have it. It's our collective form of dreaming. It's our communal form of dreaming. It's what lets us know what we can become and where we will go. And you guys have probably heard this, but the number one fear in America, stop me if you've heard this, but the number one fear in America is a fear of shark attack, right? And this is everybody. This is not people in Woods Hole who might get attacked by a shark. This is people in the middle of America that have never even been able to be near an ocean, right?
No
and the thing is, why? Because of the movie Jaws. But it isn't the people who saw Jaws, it's their children. That's how much power storytelling has. It's immensely powerful, and that means anything that we want to become as individuals or as a community, we need to have storytellers telling those stories. So we've got to expand our imagination around that. So I guess a possible pitfall or a possible challenge is sitting in that seat and knowing that the expectation in the room is for you to behave a certain way, trying to stay true to who you are, but also get your project done. And I don't have a good answer for how to do that except just keep doing it. Like, please keep doing it. How do I unwind?
Yeah. But while you're thinking about that, you're more likely to get killed by a cow, by the way. By a cow? Statistically speaking.
How is that? The cow would knock you out?
There are more of them.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I'll find that for you and share it later on Facebook. Anyway, continue.
Don't go cow tipping.
Wrong side of the
How
cow.
do I unwind? I guess, I don't know if I do. I think it's, for me, I think it's the process of making the work is actually not obviously production is high stakes. The process of creating the work, when I'm doing the actual creative meetings, that for me, I don't need to unwind from that. Like, that's the stuff that makes me want to get up in the morning, either acting or writing or sitting down with my DP and shot listing or being on location or getting that beautiful shot on set. Those things, there's no stress in that. That's it. That's the joy of life. Otherwise, maybe a glass of wine and good friends. Panels, no.
So I have felt, for the most part, as a director, very welcomed into. So I only have directed this one short film, but I directed in the theater in New York City, and I live in Western Massachusetts. I have a house and have for many years. and I direct at the Berkshire Theater Festival there, and I felt like, you know, it seems to me a very good time for female directors. People are very much wanting a female voice. They're really, you know, there are certain plays and certain pieces of work that so call for the female voice. And I'm drawn to, you know, a pretty diverse group of playwrights and writers, and you know, I often see plays and films that I feel like I would love to see the same thing directed by a woman. Not, you know, not just, I hate to get into male, female voices and stuff, and yet there is a sensibility and there is a kind of perspective and life experience that we bring as women to something that I think is quite unique. And I haven't had to go out in the world yet and compete for a director's job. What's starting to happen a bit from A Tree, a Rock, a Cloud is people are starting to come towards me and say they have some projects that they'd like to meet with me about, or am I interested in doing other things? And I do have a couple. I have a screenplay that I wrote a number of years ago that I was only going to write and not direct. Somebody else was going to direct it, who's now passed away. So I'm now considering that maybe I would direct this. So I haven't yet been involved in that kind of struggle. Tree, a Rock, a Cloud is a self-created project. So I'm going to be fascinated to see, you know, what my perspective is on this as I move forward. I having been in the film industry for 40 years, when I started out, I was often, you know, there were many, many films I did where I would be one of 2 or 3 women out of 120, a crew of 120. And you know, you have to, it is like threading the needle. You're trying to find that place where you know, retain your own sense of self and identity in a very, very masculine world. And I never had a lot of struggle with that. I think I was always game for that, although I've been very happy to see more and more women come into the film industry. Now when I do a film, I have to say, on my film, we were 75% women. Most of my major department heads were women. We had women gaffers and women electricians, and a lot of the films I've done in the last 10 years, I would say, have been 50% women. So I think this is a wonderful thing that's happening in the film industry, and I think women are stepping into more and more jobs that were, you know, traditionally always held by men. Cinematographer, sound, production designers. I have one of my best friends was one of the, you know, an early production designer who had a real struggle, you know, being an early woman as a production designer. They called her the girl on the set a lot, you know, in a very, very important position. So I think there's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot more that we need to do moving forward. But I feel like this is a good time for women directors. I feel like, you know, I've had a couple people approach me and say, we have this project and we really want a woman to direct it. And, you know, I think that's not something that has been being said for very long. Yeah. To decompress. Yeah. I like to be in nature. If I'm in nature, I'm happy. You know, someone, and I might be someone like Thomas Aquinas, who said, you cannot be neurotic in the presence of a tree. And I think I truly believe that. And I feel like, you know, in my worst moments, I'll just go out and I'll just be. I have a real thing with trees, so I guess it's no mistake that my film is called A Tree, a Rock, a Cloud. But I just go and be
I've
around.
got a tree for you to climb, Leah.
Yeah, that does it for me.
Well, speaking from the documentary world again, I think there's a little bit more parity. I think they're more, I feel like I could name as many female directors as male probably in this space that I work in. But that said, I did produce a series called The 4%, and it focused on female directors in Hollywood. And the reason it was called The 4% is because out of a study out of USC, I think, of the top 100 films from 2007 to 2014, 4% of the directors were women. Mm-hmm. And like when you get to minorities, it's like 0.0%, you know, which is appalling. And we interviewed everyone in this series from like Judd Apatow to Monique to Angelica Houston, you know, directors, actors, everyone. And the thing that I took away from it, I think, Mira Nayar, I think, spoke about, at least we're having these conversations now and having this panel at this festival right now. And I know, at Traverse City this year, I think, they were trying to, I don't think it was all female directors, but I think they were trying to have mostly female directors in the films that were selected. And so I think at least, you know, having these little rumblings of a conversation hopefully have a ripple effect and can stick in people's minds. I mean, I know even myself, having worked on that series, The 4%, I was combing through a list of production assistants for a shoot, and there was this name that was like a woman's name, and I was so excited, definitely wanted to hire this female production assistant, and then hired them, you know, over email, and then when they showed up and it was a man. But I was so happy. I thought I was doing something good for female kind. But yeah, so trying to think if I have anything else to, but yeah, just in my documentary experience, definitely crews tend to be more male. But again, on the 4%, we had a cinematographer who really tried to bring in mostly female crews when he could. I had never met a female gaffer before, had maybe met one female AC before, but so yeah. And to unwind, I have a 16-month-old, so putting her to bed is how I unwind, or hiring a babysitter, or going to work, yeah. So.
Well, our time is growing short, and we should have scheduled 2 hours for this panel, because I can keep you ladies here all day. Well, I'll share something that, a question that one of our members put out, and she asked, how can we parlay or leverage the success of Wonder Woman? Now that we've shown that women can smash box office records, how do we empower them to continue to keep going? So what piece of advice would you give, whether it's male or female, what empowering piece of advice would you give to a young filmmaker getting ready to go? And you can take a moment, everybody breathe a little bit. You want to begin, or put you on the hot seat?
I mean, yeah, no problem. A young filmmaker, I guess, if you, you know, if you put, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, if you put all of your passion behind it, if you strongly, strongly, strongly believe in what you have, and you're able to convince other people that this is amazing, and you believe it in your heart. You have to put your heart in it, and you have to fully be committed. So that way, when you go to somebody and you can sit in a room and you say, this is my passion, this is what I've been dying to do, then they'll believe you too, and then they'll, you know, because it takes a team to make a movie, so it takes a lot of people that have to support what you're thinking. So I think passion. I mean, put your heart in it, and that's it. And be passionate and go for it. And just there is, you know, you have to take every chance you can have as well. You know, you could only lose by not taking the chances. Absolutely. So you have to fight passion and fight.
Excellent.
I guess the summation of my advice would be ignorance is bliss. I think that do the work, of course, like be prepared, really dig deep, figure out what's unique about you and your vision, trust yourself, all that stuff, right? And then know how to work with a crew, know how to lead, like those things. Do all of your work, really prepare, but know that the things you don't know will actually help you also. Not knowing is how films get made. None of us would probably start on this journey if we knew everything that was going to happen during it, because there are always immense challenges and heartbreak And we had an incredibly joyful set and an amazing, the sounding was an incredible, incredible film for me to make. It was just a gift, but nonetheless, there was heartbreak along the way. There were just, even if it's the simplest thing of missing a moment you had in your head and realizing that that can't happen for whatever reason. But that not knowing all of those things is what lets you start down that path and then just do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So I'm not saying just go blindly make your movies. Do the work and really do prepare. I'm a big one on preparation, but in the end, you're never going to know it all. So do take the leap and do take the step, and then know that literally it is. There's my first AD, who's amazing, gave me a book just before we started hard pre-production. And you know, a lot of people say that making a movie is like getting on a train and you can't get off. You know, once it starts and it gets momentum, you can't get off. So, but in this book, it's a lot of directors, famous directors, talking about their first time directing. And I can't remember who said this, but there was an excerpt in the book that he had dog-eared for me, and it said, you know, forget about the train metaphor. Making a movie is like saving things from a burning house. Like, you go into the East Wing and you're like, I'll take the silverware and the dog, and you run out and it collapses. And you go to the West Wing and you're like, my sister, and you go. Like, that's what you get, but then you come away and you've got your silverware and your dog and your sister, and you make something from that. So just know that what you don't know will be your friend. And then the next time you know that, you won't know something else. When I make my next film, there will be huge blind spots I didn't know about that I couldn't possibly, and those will be the things that will give me joy and be these stories that I end up telling. So just take that next step, take the jump, do it, and then do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Before you know it, you have your film.
Well, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think you do have to just sometimes learn by the seat of your pants. There's something really to be said by really, really careful preparation, and I knew it innately that the more I prepared and the more I really, really spent time with my cinematographer and with my first AD laying out what we were going to do, because with a short film you have 6 days, and those 6 days, like some short films that were here, they shot in 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. We had 6 days, and those 6 days flew by, and we had all kinds of little crises and little things that went wrong. Our chip corroded, our card corroded the very first day, and we lost our first half a day. Corrupted, I mean, when it got put for the card to be read. And just all these like little things, you know, that you're not expecting happen, and you're having to deal with them as they go. And, you know, we had a very positive team. So, you know, our feeling was like, okay, we lost our first half a day. Everybody was probably a little nervous and off kilter anyway, so we're going to get a chance to reshoot it at the end. And that was just our attitude, and we just moved on. And I think it's like a ping pong match once it starts. You know, you're just going on instinct and in the flow. I mean, for me, one of the most important aspects of shooting the film I shot was, and I think this is always true as a director in the theater, I feel this way too, the casting is so incredibly important, that you find actors that you're really on the same page with, that you really know and understand, and it can make the whole experience so much more, it just flows so much more easily, and if you have that kind of language, the shared language with your actors. And in my case, it was really, really important to get the performances that I got with the actors and from the actors. I don't know. You know, from my perspective, I have to say, you guys blow my mind that your first film was like a feature film.
No, mine was a short.
It wasn't? Oh, yours is a short. Okay. I mean, I feel like, I've been on the other side of the camera for so many films with first-time directors and feature films. And, you know, I've seen that terrible deer in the headlight look that they get, and I've seen tears flow, and I've seen meltdowns, and I've seen looks on directors' faces where I wasn't sure we were going to go forward. You know, things were just going so terribly wrong, and there was such heartbreak, and then you move forward, and it all gets done. But I felt choosing a first film for myself that I really wanted to give myself what I felt was I wanted to take a film that I felt was very challenging in its own way, but I really felt I couldn't handle directing a feature like right out of the gate. You're brave. You're a brave woman.
No, I didn't. I did direct a short before
Oh,
the
you did?
feature. Yeah,
Oh, good.
I had the feature happened the feature, without getting into all the details, but the feature, that story happened first. Then when I knew that I was going to direct the feature, I directed a scene that could have been in the feature film but wasn't, as a sort of putting myself through film school opportunity. And we never released that because it was the same conceit as the feature. And we had the funding for the feature at that point, so we went immediately into production on the feature. But it was for me to find out if I could direct, if I wanted to direct, if I was good, if I had an aesthetic, who I wanted to work with, those kind of things. So it was kind of like a lab school. So I
And that really laid the foundation for you to feel confident to go forward with the feature then, probably. Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, people do this. They jump into feature films. It sort of blows my mind. But.
Well, I agree with what everyone has said. I think passion is the most important thing. I was fortunate to have like 15 years of experience as a producer before directing. And so it's like, what does it take to get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Just being able to worry about the directing job, but being proficient in all of the producing and all of the nuts and bolts and logistics. I also produced the film, so I was also worrying about that stuff too. But I don't know, in a way gave me more confidence in being a director because I knew all of the other stuff. But I just think the most important thing is that if you want to be a filmmaker, you have to love it because it's really hard. And I tell people the story. There's a scene in my film that takes place on New Year's Eve, and so I was there filming on New Year's Eve, and I remember talking to the cameraman, who's also an excellent documentary director himself. And I was like, I hope you don't mind, having come to Philadelphia for New Year's Eve, 2011 or whatever. And he was like, oh no, it's fine. I was talking to my wife about it, and I was like, there's nothing else I'd rather do. And I was like, it's funny, I feel the same way too. So it's like, right. You have to, it becomes your baby, and you really have to love it and to want to be with it at all hours of day and night. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, ladies. And before we wrap up, I would like to invite up for a little follow-up. If you've taken some of their advice, a way to then move on to your next step. We have Louise Kennedy Corrigan here from WBUR and The Artery. Hello. So, Louise, tell us a little bit about what some of our indie filmmakers can do for pitching.
Is this on? Yes. So The Artery is WBUR's multimedia platform for arts coverage, on air, online on our website, and in person events like this. We are always looking for great stories about the arts. We do some reviews, but a lot of what we do is features. And so what I hope I can help you with is, if you get to the point of having made a film, whether it's a short or a feature, how you can pitch that successfully to a reporter or an editor to get them to write about it. Reviews are going to happen or not happen. You don't actually have a lot of control over that. People will decide to review something or not. But for feature stories, you can increase your chances of getting written about if you find a way to pitch a story, which is something that presumably you've already done successfully by getting the film made. But the story you're going to pitch to a reporter is not necessarily the story of the film. It may be a story about the film. It may be your personal story. It may be a story of one of the actors. It may be something that happened during the filming. It may be a theme that's related to the film. Editors especially love themes. I was an arts reporter at the Globe for a long time. And I had to write a lot of what we call Sunday thumbsuckers, which is, big long feature, and these still happen online to some extent. But the editor would say, okay, there's 3 movies coming out where marriages are falling apart. Go. I had to come up with some way to tie these 3 movies together, whether it was they all do this, or there's this and this and this, so obviously we're very conflicted, so you make up something. If you can help a reporter make up a theme, you are really in good shape. So sometimes people it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is coming out at the same time as mine, they're too similar. That's actually good news, especially if you can find a third one, because it takes 3 to make a theme, okay? So I know this sounds insane, but it's media, so it's a little crazy.
So where do they find, how do they submit? Or where
How do they
find
submit? So we're pretty easy to find. We're online, and if you go to wwr.org/artery, you'll see an About page, and you can contact us there. Pitches can be really short. People sometimes go into like long, elaborate emails, or they send us all this huge press kit and stuff. A well-written couple of sentences explaining why you think it's a great story and how to get in touch with you, that's really all we need. The less, the better sometimes. I don't like reading long things anymore. You can tweet at me, you know. I'm not an assigning editor right now, but I sit next to the assigning editor, and we've been friends for 30 years, so I can help. And especially, you know, we are particularly focused on arts in Massachusetts, so if you have a local story to tell us, that's great. If you're interested in doing events with us, that's always great. And I've been thinking we should do an event on women in film in New England.
I'm all about it.
I think that would be awesome. So I would love to answer questions. I'm sure people have
So what
questions for these people.
what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and could you each tell us your www dots, where people can find you. So where can you be found online?
It's the Sixth Amendment, so
sixamendment.com.
TheSoundingFilm.com.
Ours is a tree, a rocket cloud, thefilm.com.
KingGeorgesFilm.com. It's George with an S.
And with that, I'm going to close, but our filmmakers are going to stick around to answer your questions. So thank you all for being here today. Round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.